Good morning. I'd like to begin by thanking Doctora Rosas and the rest of the conference organizing committee for inviting me to speak today. I am truly sorry I cannot be there in person, and it is such an honor and a privilege to contribute to a conversation among colleagues deeply committed to understanding and improving artisanal and small-scale mining. I'm going to try to speak slowly today because I know this is being simultaneously translated. So, everyone in this room has seen technically sound artisanal and small-scale mining interventions struggle in practice. You've seen mercury reduction programs stall. You've seen safety equipment go unused. You've seen environmental standards adopted on paper but not fully realized in practice. You've seen formalization processes move forward administratively while insecurity persists on the ground. My contribution today is not to revisit those challenges. Many of you know them far better than I do. Instead, I'd like to offer a way of connecting them. My core message is simple. In many cases, technical design is not the central barrier. The challenge is often an integration challenge, meaning that the challenge often lies in how that design interacts with livelihood systems, governance realities, and market structures. When health, environment, and productivity are addressed separately, adoption often falters. When they are treated as part of a single system, more sustainable solutions become possible. I have seen this clearly in Peru, across work on mercury reduction, formalization, labor organization, conflict, and supply chains, where the most significant barriers often sit outside miners' awareness or technology. So let me begin by briefly unpacking what I mean by that integration challenge. Across artisanal and small-scale mining programs, interventions often focus on mercury reduction, worker health and safety, and personal protective equipment, managing waste or tailings, environmental controls in general, encouraging formalization. Each of these is so important, but we do not always treat them as parts of a single system. When improvements in one domain undermine or put pressure on another, adoption becomes fragile. System misalignment can look like this: a mercury-free method that reduces gold recovery, personal protective equipment that slows work or increases heat stress, environmental controls that increase operating costs without improving market access, formalization processes that increase visibility without increasing security. None of these are inherently flawed, but they operate within constrained social and economic environments. In many mining communities, daily production determines daily income. Margins are thin. Debt relationships are embedded in supply chains. Enforcement can be unpredictable. Under these conditions, small technical changes can have large consequences. In my work with artisanal and small-scale miners, they understood mercury risks. They described it clearly. Awareness was not the central issue. But they also described income volatility, credit dependency, obligations to buyers, and fear of enforcement actions, and physical insecurity. The question was not, do miners understand mercury risk? The question was, where does mercury risk sit within a broader hierarchy of risk. The technical solution was not incorrect. It simply did not align with the social, economic, and governance realities in which miners operated. The issue was not a technical failure. It was a system misalignment. So what does it mean to treat artisanal and small-scale mining as a system? When I use the term socio-technical, I mean something practical. Artisanal and small-scale mining is a system of interrelated social and technical dimensions that shape decision-making and intervention outcomes. This means that technology, supply chains, labor organization, market factors, migration and livelihoods, policy and regulation, these are all coupled. They operate together and they shape one another. Technology influences labor organization. Labor organization shapes bargaining power. Bargaining power influences market access, and so on. Outcomes are co-produced through these interactions. So when a new technical element is introduced, it is not being inserted into an empty space. We are inserting it into a dense web of relationships. A change in one domain affects the others. And this helps explain why technically correct solutions can struggle when introduced into complex systems. Let me illustrate this with a case. In one Peruvian mining community, mercury reduction was a priority for and strongly encouraged by outside actors. The pathway appeared straightforward. Introduce safer practices, improve handling, provide training. But when we listened closely, miners described something different. They described operating within what could be called a risk economy. Income fluctuated daily. Credit was often extended through buyers who also purchased gold. Debt obligations were embedded in relationships of trust and dependency. Enforcement actions were episodic and unpredictable, and personal safety and security was a major concern. Under these conditions, a processing method that required additional time, even if safer, but disrupted existing credit and supply chain relationships was not a small adjustment or trade-off. It had implications for household stability. It could mean reduced daily output, delayed repayment of debt, strained buyer relationships, greater short-term security. So the question was not whether miners understood mercury toxicity. They did. The question was whether the intervention fit with their risk environment. Adoption was shaped by livelihood security, how risks were prioritized, and the trade-off miners navigated daily. When we view mercury reduction within this risk environment, resistance looks less like ignorance and more like rational adaptation. Across regions in Peru, we observed several recurring structural conditions. Short planning horizons shaped by insecurity, governance ambiguity around formal status, market pressures that reward liquidity and volume, migration dynamics that reorganize labor and capital quickly. In Arequipa, capital and labor were highly mobile, shaped by opportunity, migration networks, and commitments to hometown communities. Mining income circulated across regions, tying production sites to distant households and economies. In Madre de Dios, these economic flows were linked to broader environmental impacts, including deforestation and emissions. Artisanal and small-scale mining is not localized. It is embedded in broader economic, social, and ecological systems. Capital moves, labor moves, materials move, and risk moves. When an intervention is introduced at one point, its effects are distributed elsewhere. From this perspective, everyday practices in artisanal and small-scale mining are not cultural obstacles. They are adaptations to structural conditions. Mining does not operate in isolation. The system extends beyond the mine boundary. In several regions, mining operates alongside fishing, farming, and other livelihood systems. In one artisanal and small-scale mining region, we observed that environmental management decisions in one sector affected outcomes in others. For example, road infrastructure improvements for mining provided better access to agricultural markets. Water management shaped fisheries habitat. Dust and traffic shaped perceptions across the broader community. Household diversity income streams across sectors. Households diversify income streams across sectors. Health, environment, and productivity were not separate categories. They were interdependent. This has implications for intervention design. If environmental improvements in mining increase costs without improving market integration, or if safety measures reduce daily throughput in contexts where margins are thin, these changes are evaluated within a broader livelihood system, not just within mining. In this sense, adoption is not simply a technical decision. It is a household level and territorial decision. We see similar dynamics in technological transitions. In some regions, mercury reduction has been paired with shifts toward cyanidation. On paper, this can appear as progress. Less mercury loss, potentially better recovery. But the transition also shapes the system and changes the risk profile. Cyanide requires different capital structures. It introduces different waste management challenges. It shifts control toward actors who own processing facilities. And it often can consolidate processing in fewer hands that shift bargaining power within the supply chain. It can change who captures value, and it can change who holds environmental liability. Sometimes mercury does not disappear. It coexists with cyanide. Hybrid systems emerge. The technical shift is real, but the distribution of risk, control, and responsibility changes with it. Without corresponding evolution in monitoring and governance, risk is redistributed rather than eliminated. The system can trade one harm for another. A similar pattern appears in formalization. Formalization is often treated as a compliance milestone. In our research, miners frequently asked, "I am formal, what comes next?" Formalization may alter legal status, it may increase administrative requirements, it may increase visibility, but it does not automatically change access to credit, access to improved or cleaner technologies, or market access or market power. In some cases, formalization increases regulatory burden without improving economic security. Formalization is therefore not an endpoint. It is a reconfiguration of relationships among miners, the state, and markets. Its impacts depend on institutional design, and incentive alignment. So across mercury reduction, technological transition, and formalization, we see similar patterns. Interventions do not fail because they are technically flawed. They become unstable when they misalign with structural conditions. This raises a deeper question. If the problem is misalignment, what actually changes when we design with the system in mind from the beginning? If we treat artisanal and small-scale mining as a socio-technical system, three things shift in how we think about design and intervention. First, technical design operates within institutional and economic conditions. Every technical intervention, whether it is a mercury retort, a new processing method, a safety protocol, a tailing standard, or a formalization framework, is built on assumptions. Assumptions about time, assumptions about access to capital, assumptions about regulatory stability, assumptions about enforcement capacity, assumptions about institutional trust. These assumptions are often implicit. For example, a technology that requires upfront capital assumes access to credit or savings. A safer but slowing processing method assumes that miners can absorb reduced daily production. A formalization process assumes that legal status meaningfully improves security and market access. In some contexts, these assumptions hold. In others, they do not. When they do not hold, performance changes, not because the design is flawed, but because the surrounding institutional conditions differ. A socio-technical lens does not replace or diminish technical work. It situates it. Second, adoption is shaped upstream. If technical design operates within conditions, then adoption is not something that happens after deployment. It is shaped long before. Adoption depends on alignment with livelihood structures, labor organization, supply chain relationships, migration patterns, and governance conditions. Miners are not evaluating interventions in isolation, but within risk environments. So adoption is not simply, does this technology work? It is, does this fit within my risk environment? Does this align with how capital and labor move here? Does this increase or decrease my vulnerability? If those alignments are not built into design, adoption will always be fragile. So designing for adoption means designing with the system in mind from the beginning. Finally, and this is where the system logic comes full circle, health, environment, and productivity are not independent outputs. They are co-produced. An intervention that strengthens one dimension while undermining or weakening another will not be sustainable. If environmental controls increase costs without improving income security, they may be resisted. If safety measures reduce production where margins are thin, they may not persist. If formalization increases regulatory burden without improving economic stability, it may generate new vulnerabilities. These domains rise and fall together. Outcomes are co-produced. Sustainability emerges when health, environmental protection, and productivity reinforce one another, not when they compete. So what I hope this framing offers is not a new checklist. I hope it offers a diagnostic lens, a way of seeing health, environment, productivity, migration, governance, and markets as all part of a single system. When we look through that lens, a few things become clear. We can better understand why pilot projects sometimes do not scale, why adoption varies across regions, why similar policies produce different outcomes in different places. Integration is not an additional layer placed on top of technical work. It is the condition that makes technical work sustainable. In Peru, this means evaluating interventions not only by whether they are technically optimal in isolation, but by whether they are system compatible. Compatible with livelihood structures, governance realities, migration patterns, and market dynamics. Responsible and sustainable artisanal and small-scale mining emerges most reliably when miners are treated not merely as recipients of intervention, but as co-producers of technical and environmental outcomes. And when interventions are designed in ways that allow health, environmental protection, and productivity to reinforce one another rather than compete, that ultimately is what sustainability looks like. Thank you.